Queens, New York, December 10, 1978. Snow clung to the streetlights outside Robert's lounge, casting long shadows across the parking lot. James Burke stepped out of his Cadillac, the collar of his wool overcoat turned up against the cold. To passers-by, he was just another middle-aged man heading to a neighborhood bar, clean-shaven, silver-haired, the picture of suburban respectability. But the men waiting inside knew better. They called him Jimmy the Gent, a title earned not for his manners, but for his ability to blend into polite society while orchestrating chaos behind closed doors. At 45, Burke had spent 2 decades building an empire that stretched from Queens to Boston, from hijackings to narcotics, all while maintaining a facade so perfect that even his wife claimed ignorance of his criminal life. Burke's origins were unremarkable. Born in East New York, Brooklyn, to Irish immigrant parents, he grew up in a working-class household where discipline was enforced with a belt and a firm hand. His father, a postal worker, taught him to box at 6, not for sport, but to survive the streets. By 15, Burke was skipping school to run numbers for local bookies. By 20, he'd graduated to hijacking trucks on the Brooklyn docks, his quick mind and calm demeanor earning him respect in the underworld. He avoided guns not out of principle, but because he understood that violence drew attention. His methods were precise. A broken kneecap here, a disappeared rival there, all executed with such quiet efficiency that victims often blamed themselves. Former associates described his presence as unnerving, a man whose silence spoke louder than threats. By the 1970s, Burke ran the Winter Hill Gang from Robert's Lounge, a bar he owned in Queens. The establishment was a paradox. A family-friendly spot by day, serving meatloaf and draft beer to locals, and a criminal command center by night. Waitresses knew better than to linger near booth 3 after 9 p.m., where Burke held court with men whose names never appeared in newspapers. His crew wasn't Italian, as most assumed, but a patchwork of Irish, Jewish, and Italian-American outcasts. The kind of men who didn't fit into traditional mafia families but were too dangerous to ignore. Burke's genius was his ability to exploit this outsider status. He paid his men well, kept his word, and eliminated problems before they became threats. Henry Hill, a future informant, later described Burke's leadership style. He didn't ask for respect. He made you give it. The Winter Hill Gang's operations were as diverse as they were audacious. They hijacked trucks carrying everything from cigarettes to fur coats, their routes mapped with military precision. They ran loan-sharking rings that bled small businesses dry, charging 2% weekly interest, a rate so high that default was almost guaranteed. But Burke's true innovation was in narcotics. While other crews stuck to street-level deals, he pioneered bulk smuggling, bringing in multi-kilo shipments of cocaine and heroin through Boston's docks. He paid off customs officials with the same casual efficiency he used to tip waitresses. By 1978, his annual take was estimated at $2 million. Cash he stored in a walk-in vault behind Robert's Lounge, accessible only through a hidden door in the men's restroom. Yet Burke's most dangerous weapon was his duality. By day, he was Jimmy Burke, devoted husband and father of 5, attending his children's school plays and coaching Little League. He drove a station wagon, not a flashy sports car, and his suits were bought off the rack, not tailored. Neighbors described him as the quiet guy who always said hello. Even when federal agents raided Robert's Lounge in 1976, they found nothing incriminating, just a bar receipt signed James P. Burke, manager. His wife, Dolores, genuinely believed he ran a legitimate business. He came home every night, she told reporters after his arrest. He kissed the kids goodnight. How could I know? The truth was more complicated. Burke's home life wasn't a cover. It was a sanctuary. He protected his family fiercely, forbidding associates from mentioning work at the dinner table. But this separation also made him unpredictable. Men who saw him tuck his daughter into bed one night watched him order a hit the next morning without blinking. It was this duality that made Burke the perfect architect of the Lufthansa heist. For years, he'd been building connections at JFK Airport, bribing baggage handlers and security guards with cash and threats. He knew the cargo terminal's rhythms better than the employees themselves. When the night shift changed, where the blind spots in surveillance cameras were, which safes held the most cash. The idea for the heist came in 1977, when a corrupt Pan Am employee mentioned Lufthansa's practice of storing unclaimed cash from international flights overnight. Burke didn't respond, he just smiled, the kind of smile that made men check their pockets for missing wallets. Preparations began quietly. Burke recruited 6 men he trusted implicitly. Thomas DeSimone, a volatile but brilliant wheelman. Angelo Sepe, a safecracker with a knack for silence. Robert McMahon, a former cop turned inside man. Louis Caffra and Paul Gardiz, muscle with clean records, and Joe Manry, whose charm could disarm even the most suspicious guard. Burke didn't brief them in a boardroom. He gathered them in the back room of Robert's lounge, sliding blueprints across the table like a poker hand. "No guns," he said. "No masks. Just walk in like you belong." The plan was audacious. Enter the cargo building through an unlocked service door, subdue the guards with minimal force, and load the cash into duffel bags before the next shift arrived. Burke's mantra was simple: silent over violent. Always. But Burke's most critical move was securing the mafia's blessing. The Lufthansa terminal fell under the jurisdiction of Paul Vario, capo of the Lucchese crime family. Burke, though Irish, had earned Vario's trust through years of profitable partnerships. He met Vario at a diner in Ozone Park, sliding a manila envelope across the table. Inside was $50,000, a down payment for the right to hit Lufthansa. Vario didn't count the money. He just nodded. "Make it clean," he said. "And remember who owns the airport." Burke knew the unspoken rule. The mafia took 25% of the take, no questions asked. But he also knew that, in the underworld, percentages were flexible. The real question wasn't how much he'd give Vario. It was how much he'd keep for himself. The night before the heist, Burke hosted his usual Sunday dinner at home. His daughter recalls him carving the roast beef with steady hands, laughing at her jokes about school. Later, he tucked her in, reading The Cat in the Hat until her eyelids drooped. Only when the house was quiet did he slip out, meeting his crew at Robert's lounge. They didn't discuss the plan. They drilled it for weeks. Instead, Burke handed each man an envelope containing $1,000 in cash. "For luck," he said, "and for silence." The crew nodded. They knew the stakes. They also knew Burke's reputation. Men who talked disappeared. December 11th, 1978. 3 a.m. The cargo building at JFK lay silent under a blanket of snow. Inside, 8 guards monitored monitors showing empty corridors. They didn't see the 6 men approaching through the service alley, their boots leaving faint prints in the fresh powder. They didn't hear the door click open, unlocked, just as the insider had promised. When Burke and his crew entered, they moved with the calm of men who'd rehearsed this moment 100 times. No guns were drawn. No alarms were triggered. Within 6 minutes, $5 million in cash and nearly $1 million in jewels were loaded into duffel bags. By 3:30 a.m., they were gone, leaving behind only a single coffee cup on a desk, a final touch of Burke's signature calm. Back at Robert's lounge, Burke counted the take with gloved hands, the bills glowing under the bar's dim lights. He gave each man $75,000, more than they'd ever seen, and promised another $25,000 once the heat died down. The crew celebrated quietly, knowing the real work was just beginning. Laundering the cash, avoiding marked bills, and staying off the FBI's radar. But Burke was already thinking ahead. He'd planned every detail, the entry, the escape, the division of spoils. What he hadn't planned for was the greed that would follow, the paranoia that would turn allies into targets, and the blood that would stain every dollar they'd stolen. By dawn, the news was everywhere. The largest cash robbery in U.S. history. But Jimmy Burke wasn't watching the reports. He was back home, kissing his wife goodbye before driving his kids to school. To the outside world, he was just another commuter in the morning rush. Only the faint smell of baby powder on his coat, a trick to mask gun oil, hinted at the night's work. The heist was perfect. The fallout would be anything but. JFK Airport, 1978. The Lufthansa cargo terminal wasn't just a building. It was a labyrinth of contradictions. Officially, it was one of the most secure facilities in the United States, handling millions of dollars in cash and valuables daily. Unofficially, it was a sieve. The terminal's design dated to the 1950s, when air freight was a novelty, not a gold mine. Its corridors twisted like a maze, with blind spots where security cameras hadn't been updated since Nixon was president. The safes were mechanical relics, vulnerable to anyone who knew the combination, which, as it turned out, was half the staff. The real vulnerability wasn't the hardware. It was the human element. Lufthansa's policy of storing unclaimed cash from international flights overnight created a nightly jackpot. Every Monday through Friday, bundles of Deutsche Marks, Swiss francs, and US dollars, sometimes totaling $5 million, were locked in Vault 206 until morning. The guards, mostly off-duty cops earning overtime, treated the routine like clockwork. At 3 a.m., they'd check the vault, then retreat to the break room for coffee and gossip, leaving the cargo floor unattended for 15 minutes. This window, repeated like a heartbeat, was the key to the heist. Burke discovered these rhythms through Robert McMahon, a former NYPD officer turned Lufthansa security guard. McMahon wasn't a career criminal. He'd fallen into debt after his wife's medical bills mounted. Burke found him at a bar near the airport, buying rounds with increasingly shaky hands. "You look like a man who needs a friend," Burke said, sliding into the booth. 2 weeks later, McMahon was showing Burke blueprints of the cargo terminal. The details were damning. The service door's lock was rusted shut on the inside, propped open with a brick. The vault's combination was written on a sticky note inside the manager's desk. Even the guard rotation schedule was posted on a bulletin board. "It's not a vault," McMahon admitted. "It's a piggy bank." The terminal's security flaws were compounded by the era's lax financial regulations. In 1978, air freight cash wasn't tracked like bank deposits. Bills weren't serialized, and there were no digital records of what entered or left the vault. Lufthansa's policy was simply to count the cash each morning, a process so haphazard that discrepancies were chalked up to human error. One guard later testified, "We'd find $10,000 missing and just assume someone miscounted." This culture of complacency made the terminal a magnet for corruption. Baggage handlers routinely skimmed from shipments, selling everything from fur coats to camera equipment on the side. Some even rented out the terminal's blind spots to local crews for after-hours heists. "It was open season," a former employee said. "If you had cash, you were a target." Burke exploited this ecosystem with surgical precision. He started by bribing low-level employees, $500 to a night shift supervisor for guard schedules, $1,000 to a baggage handler for access to the service alley. But his masterstroke was securing the loyalty of Louis Caffra, a Lufthansa employee with a gambling problem. Caffra wasn't just another insider. He was the vault's key holder, responsible for opening Vault 206 each morning. Burke found him at a poker game in Queens, watching him lose his paycheck in 3 hands. "Let me settle your debts," Burke offered. "All of them." Caffra hesitated, but the weight of his debts won out. Within days, he was sketching the vault's layout on napkins, noting the exact location of the alarm wires. "They're dummies," he told Burke. "Cut them, and nothing happens." The crew's reconnaissance was relentless. For 3 months, they mapped the terminal's rhythms like scientists studying a specimen. Angelo Sepe, the safecracker, posed as a maintenance worker, testing door hinges and lock mechanisms. Thomas D. Simone, the wheelman, timed his drives from Roberts Lounge to JFK, noting which routes avoided police patrols. Even the weather became part of the plan. They chose December 11th because snow would muffle tire noise and cover footprints. Every variable was accounted for except human greed. On the night of the heist, the terminal was a portrait of predictability. At 2:45 a.m., the night shift supervisor left for his coffee break, leaving the service door propped open. At 3 a.m., the guards retreated to the break room, their laughter echoing through the empty corridors. Burke's crew entered through the service alley, their boots silent on the snow-dusted pavement. They moved like ghosts, avoiding the few working cameras by sticking to the shadows. When they reached Vault 206, Cafora's intel proved flawless. The combination was written on a sticky note inside the manager's desk. The vault door opened with a soft click, revealing stacks of cash glowing under the work lights. The crew worked with mechanical efficiency. Duffel bags lined with burlap hit the floor with soft thuds. They took only what fit 6 bags, $5 million in cash, $1 million in jewels, leaving behind unclaimed bonds and smaller bills. No alarm sounded. No guards were harmed. By 3:06 a.m., they were gone, the service door closing softly behind them. In the break room, the guards sipped coffee, oblivious to the $6 million that had vanished under their noses. Back at Robert's lounge, Burke counted the hall by lantern light. The crew sat in silence, the weight of their success settling over them like the winter chill. But as dawn broke over JFK, no one noticed the coffee cup left on the desk. A single fingerprint on the rim, belonging to a man who'd already made his first mistake. Robert's Lounge, Queens. November 1978. The back room smelled of stale beer and cigar smoke as Jimmy Burke spread blueprints across the scarred wooden table. His eyes scanned the 6 men seated around him, men who would either make history or vanish without a trace. This wasn't a recruitment drive. It was a surgical strike team selection. Burke had spent weeks vetting potential crew members, eliminating anyone with a loose tongue, a gambling problem, or a history of police contact. In the underworld, trust wasn't given, it was earned through silence, and even then, it was conditional. Thomas DeSimone sat at Burke's right hand, his fingers drumming a nervous rhythm on the table. At 28, DeSimone was the crew's wild card, a volatile Italian-American with a reputation for violence that bordered on psychosis. But he was also brilliant behind the wheel, able to navigate JFK's perimeter roads without triggering a single radar gun. Burke had watched him execute a hijacking in 1976. No shots fired, no witnesses, just a van full of fur coats that vanished into the night. DeSimone's only flaw was his temper. Once, after a card game, he chased a debtor through 3 boroughs with a tire iron. But Burke knew how to channel that rage. "You'll drive. No talking. Just get us in and out." DeSimone nodded, his jaw tightening. He understood the stakes. Across from him, Angelo Sepe adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses, studying the vault schematics with the focus of a surgeon. At 42, Sepe was the crew's safecracker, a quiet man who'd learned his trade in the Navy repairing shiplocks. His hands were steady, his movements precise, qualities that made him indispensable. Burke had recruited him after a failed heist in 1975, where Sepe had disarmed a faulty alarm system mid-job, saving the crew from disaster. "You'll crack the vault," Burke said, tapping the blueprint. "No mistakes." Sepe didn't reply. He just slid a small vial of baby powder across the table, a trick to detect footprints in dust. Burke nodded. The man knew his business. Robert McMahon, the former NYPD officer turned Lufthansa security guard, sat slumped in his chair, his eyes avoiding Burke's gaze. McMahon had been Burke's first recruit, the insider who'd made the heist possible. But his presence was a liability. He drank too much, talked too much, and carried the guilt of betraying his badge like a weight. Burke had warned him, "One slip, and you're gone." McMahon had nodded, but his hands trembled as he lit a cigarette. Burke made a mental note. McMahon would need watching. Louis Cafra and Paul Gardiz, the crew's muscle, sat shoulder to shoulder, their broad frames filling the chairs. Both were ex-boxers with clean records, a rarity in Burke's world. Cafra had worked the docks since he was 16. His knowledge of JFK's layout unmatched. Gardiz, quieter but equally imposing, had once subdued a hijacking suspect with a single chokehold. Burke had tested them in a bar fight months earlier, watching as they disarmed 3 attackers without drawing a weapon. "You'll handle the guards," Burke said. Quietly, they exchanged a glance, then nodded. They knew what quietly meant. Joe Manry, the crew's wild card, leaned against the wall, his smile disarming even in the dim light. At 35, Manry was the only one with a legitimate job, a baggage handler at JFK, but his charm made him the perfect frontman. He could talk his way past security with a joke and a handshake, a skill that had already secured access to the cargo terminal's blind spots. Burke had met him through a mutual friend, watching as Manry convinced a skeptical bartender to serve them after hours. "You'll lead the way," Burke said. "Make them think you belong." Manry grinned. "They already do." Burke reviewed the plan one last time. No guns. No masks. Just 6 men walking into a vault and walking out with a fortune. He handed each man an envelope containing $1,000 in cash. "For luck," he said. "And for silence." The crew nodded. They knew the rules. No boasting, no drunken confessions, not even to wives. The penalty for breaking silence? Immediate expulsion. And Burke made it clear he'd handle anyone who threatened the mission. The night of the heist, the crew moved with clockwork precision. In the snow-dusted alley, DeSimone idled the getaway truck, engine purring. Inside the manhole, the crew crawled through darkness, counting steps by touch. When they emerged in the furnace room, Manry gave the all-clear signal. 3 slow blinks of his flashlight. The takedown was flawless. Guards subdued, vault cracked, cash secured. But as they retreated through the passage, Kafora's gloved hand brushed against the vault room wall. The coffee cup on the desk, left behind as a distraction, slipped from his grip, landing silently on the floor. No one noticed, not even Kafra. Back at Robert's lounge, they counted the haul. $5 million in cash, $1 million in jewels. Burke grinned, dividing the take into 6 equal shares. "Cleaner than a whistle," he said. But as Manry lit a cigarette, his hand trembled. "I think I dropped something," he muttered. Burke's smile vanished. "What?" Manry paled. "The coffee cup." The room froze. 6 men stared at the floor, imagining that cup lying in the snow-covered alley. "Impossible," Burke finally said. "The snow covered it." But deep down he knew. Snow melts, and coffee cups talk. 3 a.m., December 11th, 1978. The Lufthansa cargo terminal at JFK Airport lay silent under a blanket of snow. Inside, 8 guards monitored monitors showing empty corridors. They didn't see the 6 men approaching through the service alley, their boots leaving faint prints in the fresh powder. They didn't hear the service door click open, unlocked, just as the insider had promised. When Jimmy Burke and his crew entered, they moved with the calm of men who'd rehearsed this moment 100 times. No guns were drawn. No alarms were triggered. Within 6 minutes, $5 million in cash and nearly $1 million in jewels would vanish into the night. The crew entered in pairs, staying low to avoid the few working security cameras. Joe Manry led the way, his baggage handler uniform blending perfectly with the terminal's night shift. Behind him, Thomas DeSimone and Angelo Sepe carried duffel bags lined with burlap to muffle the jingle of coins. Louis Kafra and Paul Gardiz flanked Robert McMahon, whose security badge granted them access to restricted areas. Burke brought up the rear, his eyes scanning for anything out of place. They moved like shadows through the maze of corridors, avoiding the main hall where the guards monitored their screens. At 3:02 a.m., they reached the break room. Through the window, they watched the guards laughing over coffee, oblivious to the intruders just feet away. McMahon checked his watch, right on schedule. The guards always took their coffee break at 3 o'clock sharp, leaving the cargo floor unattended for exactly 15 minutes. Kafra and Gardiz positioned themselves outside the door, ready to subdue the guards if needed. But the plan called for silence, and silence they would have. Manry led the crew toward Vault 206, his knowledge of the terminal's layout flawless. They passed stacks of luggage and cargo containers, their footsteps muffled by the snow-dusted concrete. At the vault door, Sepe went to work. He didn't need tools. Kafra had provided the combination days earlier, written on a sticky note inside the manager's desk. Sepe spun the dials with gloved hands. Right to 28, left to 17, right to 4. The mechanism clicked open with a sigh. "Every lock has a key," Burke had told them during planning. "Sometimes the key's a man's stupidity." Inside, stacks of cash glowed under the dim work lights. Payroll sacks spilled Deutsche Marks and Swiss francs across the steel table. Gold certificates fanned out like playing cards. Burke didn't hesitate. He began filling the duffel bags with surgical precision. $50,000 per bag, mostly small bills to avoid suspicion later. A payroll sack for Lufthansa's German office? Left untouched. Bearer bonds? Stuffed into bag 3. Speed beats weight. Always. DeSimone monitored the clock, tapping his wrist twice to signal 5 minutes left. Manry swept the corridor, flashlight beam cutting through darkness. All clear. The vault room's floor showed no footprints. Just the faint dusting of baby powder Sepe had sprinkled earlier. No traces. But the vault held ghosts. In the corner, a forgotten Christmas bonus sack spilled holiday cash. $50 bills stamped Fröhlich Weihnachten. The night manager had set it aside for morning distribution. Burke hesitated. Taking it would breach his own rule. Only what fits in 6 bags. Yet the crew's discipline held. The sack stayed. Greed had no place here. At 3:06 a.m., Burke gave the signal. Time to leave. The crew retreated through the corridors, duffel bags slung over shoulders. Manry lingered to sprinkle more baby powder over their tracks. A final safeguard. In the service alley, snow blanketed the ground, erasing tire tracks from DeSimone's idling truck. By 3:15 a.m., they were gone. Back at Robert's lounge, lantern light revealed the haul. $5 million in cash, $1 million in jewels. Burke counted each share with surgical care. $750,000 per man, with promises of another $250,000 once the heat died down. No arguments. No second guesses. The crew smoked in silence, the weight of success settling over them like the winter chill. Manry lit a cigarette, his hands steady now. Perfect. But Manry's calm cracked at 4 a.m. A flicker in his eyes, a tremor in his voice as he muttered to Burke, "I think I dropped something." Burke froze. "What?" Manry paled. The coffee cup. The room turned ice cold. 6 men replayed the heist in their minds. The vault room's baby powder, the retreat through the corridors. Had they missed a trace? Burke's voice cut through the panic. The snow covered it. It's gone. But Manry knew better. Snow melts, and coffee cups talk. December 12, 1978. One day after the heist, the crew gathered in Tony Pino's apartment. The air smelled of fish stew and damp wool, but tension hung thicker than the steam from the stove. Burke spread the cash on the table. 6 equal stacks, each wrapped in brown paper. "No changes," he said. "We agreed. $750,000 each. No more, no less." But DeSimone's eyes lingered on the jewels stacked in the corner. $1 million in untraceable diamonds and gold. "Those could double our take," he muttered. Burke's glare silenced him. "We stick to the plan. Jewels draw heat." The crew's unity frayed like old rope. Manry stopped sleeping, jumping at car engines outside. Sepe spent hours shredding his notebook pages, fearing fingerprints. Even the respectable members slipped. Cafra bought a new Cadillac. Gardiz donated $50,000 to his church. Money talks, but it also whispers secrets. By December 20th, Manry's paranoia became action. He confronted Burke in a Queens bar, voice low but urgent. "We need to move the jewels. Now." Burke refused. The plan was clean. "Don't fix what isn't broken." Manry stormed out, muttering about leaving loose ends. The first crack came on January 3, 1979. An FBI agent traced the baby powder found in the vault room to a local hardware store. The clerk remembered a man in a wool coat buying a vial the week of the heist. Had a nervous twitch, like he needed a smoke. Manry's habit. By January 10th, FBI agents were knocking on doors in Queens. Manry vanished, leaving his girlfriend a note. "Gone to clear my head." His absence screamed guilt. Burke called an emergency meeting in a fish-packing plant. Snow tapped against the windows like a nervous heartbeat. "Manry's missing," Burke said. "If he talks, we're done." Sepe argued for damage control. "Find him. Quietly." DeSimone disagreed. "Let him burn. Better one than all of us." For the first time, the crew split, half loyal to Burke's code, half eyeing Manry as a liability. That night, Manry resurfaced at a diner, pale and shaking. He'd spent 48 hours in a motel watching the street. "They're coming," he told Sepe. "I saw a Fed outside my building." January 14th. Manry didn't show for the cruise check-in. By noon, the New York Times headline blared, "Lufthansa robbery suspect in custody." Inside Robert's lounge, Burke burned Manry's share of the cash. "He broke the circle," he said, watching the flames. "Now we run." But the damage was done. Manry's coffee cup, found in the vault room, had already given the FBI names, faces, and addresses. The crew's perfect crime had a single flaw: human nature. The FBI moved fast. On January 25th, they raided Manry's apartment, seizing a duffel bag hidden under floorboards. $750,000 in Lufthansa cash. Inside the bag, a note in Burke's handwriting: "Trust no one outside the circle." The crew's mantra had become their epitaph. By February 1st, warrants were issued for Burke, DeSimone, and Sepe. The FBI's strategy was simple: find the weak link, let it snap. Manry cracked first. On February 5th, he confessed to everything: the service door entry, the guard's coffee break, the 6 duffel bags. In exchange, he got immunity. Jimmy Burke ran it, Manry told agents. Sepe cracked the vault. DeSimone drove the truck. He even drew maps of the escape route. The FBI listened, taking notes. The smallest mistake can unravel the biggest plan. Manry's coffee cup wasn't just evidence. It was a confession. By March, the net tightened. Sepe was caught trying to sell jewels in Manhattan. DeSimone's Cadillac was spotted near a Lufthansa branch in Newark. Burke fled to Canada but returned when his daughter fell ill. On April 10th, he surrendered at the border, hands raised. "I'm done running," he said. The crew's silence had lasted 120 days. At trial, Manry testified against them all. Burke stared at the floor as Manry described the vault room, the baby powder, the 6 bags. "We thought we were ghosts," Manry said. "Turns out we were just men." The judge sentenced Burke to 20 years, Sepe to 15, DeSimone to 12. Manry walked free. Years later, Burke would tell a reporter, "We planned every detail, every lock, every guard, every snowflake. But we forgot the one thing you can't control: a man's fear." The coffee cup left behind wasn't a mistake. It was a mirror, and in its reflection, the crew saw themselves. Not masterminds, but mortals. January 1979. The FBI's New York field office hummed with a new rhythm. Agent Bob Pistone's desk overflowed with evidence: Manry's coffee cup, tire tread photos, baby powder samples. But the real breakthrough came from an unexpected source: a Lufthansa payroll clerk named Martha Evans. On December 12th, she'd noticed something odd while reconciling German office accounts. $500,000 in Deutsche Marks had vanished from the vault. "Those were set aside for bonuses," she told agents. "The night manager would never move them." Pistone's pulse quickened. This wasn't just a cash grab, it was surgical precision. The manhunt began with cold discipline. Pistone's team staked out Queens tenements, tracking the crew's routines like hunters. They noted DeSimone's daily ritual: 7 a.m. at Santarpio's Pizza for espresso, always sitting by the window. On February 2nd, they followed him to a garage in Astoria where he serviced his Cadillac. Hidden cameras captured him lifting the trunk, revealing a duffel bag identical to those used in the heist. When DeSimone left for coffee, agents pried the trunk open. Inside, $300,000 in Lufthansa cash, still bundled with German rubber bands. No secret stays buried forever. Sepe proved harder to corner. He'd vanished after Manry's arrest, leaving only whispers in the criminal underground. Then, on February 12th, a Manhattan pawnshop owner called the FBI. A man matching Sepe's description had tried to sell gold certificates stamped Lufthansa security. Surveillance footage showed him in a wool cap, eyes darting like a trapped animal. Agents swarmed the Bowery Flophouse where he'd registered under a fake name. They found him mid-repack. $500,000 in certificates spilling from a suitcase. Baby powder scattered across the bed. Sepe didn't resist. "Took you long enough," he muttered. staring at the evidence. Burke became a ghost. He fled to Montreal, living under the alias Thomas Riley, in a boarding house near Notre Dame Basilica. For 47 days, he avoided newspapers, burned his coat, and grew a beard. But on April 10th, his daughter's appendicitis forced his hand. Rushing her to Hôpital Saint-Enfant Jesus, he used his real name at the front desk. Canadian police alerted the FBI. When Burke emerged from the hospital, 2 agents blocked his path. He raised his hands without a word, snow melting on his shoulders. "I'm done running," he said. The crew's silence had lasted 120 days. The arrests triggered a domino effect. DeSimone's wife, questioned at her kitchen table, broke first. She handed over a ledger hidden in her sewing kit, Burke's meticulous records of the crew's shares. "Jimmy said it was insurance," she whispered, tears smudging the ink. Sepe's landlady revealed he'd paid 3 months' rent in cash the week after the heist. Even Gardaí folded under pressure, surrendering $200,000 sewn into his church robe lining. By June, all 6 men faced federal charges. The courtroom became a theater of betrayal. Prosecutors played wiretaps of DeSimone begging Burke, "Tell them I drove the truck but didn't enter the building." Sepe's lawyer tried to discredit Manry's testimony. "My client was framed by a man who dropped his coffee cup like a rookie." But Manry's evidence was irrefutable. Photos of the vault room's baby powder footprints matched Sepe's work boots. When Burke took the stand, he stared straight ahead, refusing to acknowledge Manry. "I don't know that man," he said, though they'd shared coffee for years. The judge's gavel fell like a tombstone. Sentencing day, October 1979. The federal courthouse buzzed with onlookers. Families of Lufthansa employees packed the gallery. Guards who'd lost pensions, clerks who'd faced shame. Burke entered in a borrowed suit, his hands steady but eyes hollow. The judge, William T. McCarthy, adjusted his glasses and began, "James Burke, you orchestrated the most brazen theft in American history." Burke's jaw tightened as McCarthy detailed the crew's planning. The service door entry, the guard's coffee break, the 6 duffel bags. "You treated human trust as a commodity," the judge said. "Now you'll learn its value." Burke received 20 years. Sepe, 15. DeSimone, 12. Gardaí got 8 for minimal involvement. Manry walked free, flanked by FBI agents as he exited. Outside, reporters shouted questions. Manry avoided cameras, but his hands trembled as he lit a cigarette. "I did what I had to," he mumbled. That night, he moved to Florida under a new name. The crew's perfect crime had ended not with a bang, but with the scrape of prison gates. Inmates at Alcatraz nicknamed Burke the Professor. His cell held only 3 items: a Bible, a chessboard, and a photo of his daughter. Guards noted his quiet dignity. He taught illiterate prisoners to read, never complained about meals. But in 1982, a fight in the yard changed everything. A convict from the Philly crew, the ones who'd failed at Brinks in 1947, recognized Burke. "You're the guy who pulled it off," he sneered. When Burke ignored him, the man smashed a tray over his head. Burke didn't fight back. "I paid my debt," he told the warden later. "This is extra." Sepe found purpose in the prison library. He studied law books, drafting appeals that went nowhere. His only rebellion came in 1984, when he refused to work the laundry detail. "I cracked vaults," he told guards. "Not sheets." He spent 30 days in solitary, a concrete box with a slit for food. There, he sketched Lufthansa blueprints on toilet paper, reliving every step. "We were ghosts," he wrote in a smuggled letter. "Then we became men." DeSimone's downfall was swift. In 1980, guards found him with a homemade still in his cell. Alcoholism, they noted in his file. By 1983, he'd lost 2 fingers in a factory accident. "Speed beats weight," he'd joke bitterly to Burke during yard walks. "But time beats us all." When parole came in 1990, he returned to Queens a broken man, driving cabs while his Cadillac sat rusting in a junkyard. The crew's families bore silent scars. Burke's daughter, now 16, visited him monthly but never spoke of her mother's suicide in 1981. Sepe's wife divorced him, taking their savings to open a laundromat. Ironic, isn't it? She told reporters. DeSimone's son dropped out of high school to support his mother, working nights at a fish packing plant. Freedom isn't free. The price echoed in empty chairs at dinner tables, in pawned wedding rings, in the way neighbors crossed the street to avoid the robber's kin. By 1985, the Lufthansa terminal stood empty, a hollow shell at JFK. Vandals broke its windows. Teenagers daubed "Ghosts live here" on its walls. The city auctioned it off for $75,000, a fraction of its worth. The new owner converted it into a parking lot, where cars now erased the ghosts of that December night. Only Vault 206 remained untouched, its baby powder long gone but its story etched in the steel. February 1979. The FBI's New York field office hummed with a new rhythm. Agent Bob Pistone's desk overflowed with evidence. Manry's coffee cup, tire tread photos, baby powder samples. But the real breakthrough came from an unexpected source, a Lufthansa payroll clerk named Martha Evans. On December 12th, she'd noticed something odd while reconciling German office accounts. $500,000 in Deutsche Marks had vanished from the vault. Those were set aside for bonuses, she told agents. The night manager would never move them. Pistone's pulse quickened. This wasn't just a cash grab, it was surgical precision. The manhunt began with cold discipline. Pistone's team staked out Queens tenements, tracking the crew's routines like hunters. They noted DeSimone's daily ritual. 7 a.m. at Santarpio's Pizza for espresso, always sitting by the window. On February 2nd, they followed him to a garage in Astoria where he serviced his Cadillac. Hidden cameras captured him lifting the trunk, revealing a duffel bag identical to those used in the heist. When DeSimone left for coffee, agents pried the trunk open. Inside, $300,000 in Lufthansa cash, still bundled with German rubber bands. No secret stays buried forever. Sepe proved harder to corner. He'd vanished after Manry's arrest, leaving only whispers in the criminal underground. Then, on February 12th, a Manhattan pawnshop owner called the FBI. A man matching Sepe's description had tried to sell gold certificates stamped Lufthansa security. Surveillance footage showed him in a wool cap, eyes darting like a trapped animal. Agents swarmed the Bowery Flophouse where he'd registered under a fake name. They found him mid-repack. $500,000 in certificates spilling from a suitcase. Baby powder scattered across the bed. Sepe didn't resist. "Took you long enough," he muttered, staring at the evidence. Burke became a ghost. He fled to Montreal, living under the alias Thomas Riley, in a boarding house near Notre Dame Basilica. For 47 days, he avoided newspapers, burned his coat, and grew a beard. But on April 10th, his daughter's appendicitis forced his hand. Rushing her to Hôpital Saint-Enfant Jesus, he used his real name at the front desk. Canadian police alerted the FBI. When Burke emerged from the hospital, 2 agents blocked his path. He raised his hands without a word, snow melting on his shoulders. "I'm done running," he said. The crew's silence had lasted 120 days. The arrests triggered a domino effect. DeSimone's wife, questioned at her kitchen table, broke first. She handed over a ledger hidden in her sewing kit, Burke's meticulous records of the crew's shares. "Jimmy said it was insurance," she whispered, tears smudging the ink. Sepe's landlady revealed he'd paid 3 months' rent in cash the week after the heist. Even Gardays folded under pressure, surrendering $200,000 sewn into his church robe lining. By June, all 6 men faced federal charges. The courtroom became a theater of betrayal. Prosecutors played wiretaps of DeSimone begging Burke, "Tell them I drove the truck but didn't enter the building." Sepe's lawyer tried to discredit Manry's testimony. "My client was framed by a man who dropped his coffee cup like a rookie." But Manry's evidence was irrefutable. Photos of the vault room's baby powder footprints matched Sepe's work boots. When Burke took the stand, he stared straight ahead, refusing to acknowledge Manry. "I don't know that man," he said, though they'd shared coffee for years. The judge's gavel fell like a tombstone. Sentencing day, October 1979. The federal courthouse buzzed with onlookers. Families of Lufthansa employees packed the gallery. Guards who'd lost pensions, clerks who'd faced shame. Burke entered in a borrowed suit, his hands steady but eyes hollow. The judge, William T. McCarthy, adjusted his glasses and began, "James Burke, you orchestrated the most brazen theft in American history." Burke's jaw tightened as McCarthy detailed the cruise planning. The service door entry, the guard's coffee break, the 6 duffel bags. "You treated human trust as a commodity," the judge said. "Now you'll learn its value." Burke received 20 years. Sepe, 15. DeSimone, 12. Gardiz got 8 for minimal involvement. Manry walked free, flanked by FBI agents as he exited. Outside, reporters shouted questions. Manry avoided cameras, but his hands trembled as he lit a cigarette. "I did what I had to," he mumbled. That night, he moved to Florida under a new name. The crew's perfect crime had ended not with a bang, but with the scrape of prison gates. Inmates at Alcatraz nicknamed Burke the Professor. His cell held only 3 items: a Bible, a chessboard, and a photo of his daughter. Guards noted his quiet dignity. He taught illiterate prisoners to read, never complained about meals. But in 1982, a fight in the yard changed everything. A convict from the Philly crew, the ones who'd failed at Brinks in 1947, recognized Burke. "You're the guy who pulled it off," he sneered. When Burke ignored him, the man smashed a tray over his head. Burke didn't fight back. "I paid my debt," he told the warden later. "This is extra." Sepe found purpose in the prison library. He studied law books, drafting appeals that went nowhere. His only rebellion came in 1984, when he refused to work the laundry detail. "I cracked vaults," he told guards, "not sheets." He spent 30 days in solitary, a concrete box with a slit for food. There, he sketched Lufthansa blueprints on toilet paper, reliving every step. "We were ghosts," he wrote in a smuggled letter. "Then we became men." DeSimone's downfall was swift. In 1980, guards found him with a homemade still in his cell. Alcoholism, they noted in his file. By 1983, he'd lost 2 fingers in a factory accident. "Speed beats weight," he'd joke bitterly to Burke during yard walks. "But time beats us all." When parole came in 1990, he returned to Queens a broken man, driving cabs while his Cadillac sat rusting in a junkyard. The crew's families bore silent scars. Burke's daughter, now 16, visited him monthly but never spoke of her mother's suicide in 1981. Sepe's wife divorced him, taking their savings to open a laundromat. "Ironic, isn't it?" she told reporters. DeSimone's son dropped out of high school to support his mother, working nights at a fish packing plant. Freedom isn't free. The price echoed in empty chairs at dinner tables, in pawned wedding rings, in the way neighbors crossed the street to avoid the robber's kin. By 1985, the Lufthansa terminal stood empty, a hollow shell at JFK. Vandals broke its windows. Teenagers daubed "Ghosts Live Here" on its walls. The city auctioned it off for $75,000, a fraction of its worth. The new owner converted it into a parking lot, where cars now erased the ghosts of that December night. Only Vault 206 remained untouched, its baby powder long gone but its story etched in the steel. The silence began the moment Manry walked free. In Alcatraz's exercise yard, Burke spotted Sepe staring at him from across the chain-link fence. Sepe's lips moved. "You knew." But the wind swallowed the words. Burke turned away. That night, a note appeared in his cell. "Traitor's blood pays debts," scrawled in shaky handwriting, and signed. The prison warden dismissed it as inmate drama. "Fear makes monsters of men," Burke told his lawyer the next day. Paranoia spread like mold. Sepe stopped eating meals with Burke, claiming stomach issues. DeSimone started carrying a shiv fashioned from a toothbrush. In the prison library, Sepe found a book on poisons left open to arsenic. He reported it, but guards shrugged. "Everyone's got enemies here." The truth was darker. Manry's immunity deal included weekly updates on the crew's morale. FBI agents fed him snippets. Burke's asking about parole. DeSimone's drinking battery acid. Manry used the intel to demand more protection, painting his former brothers as threats. The breaking point came in 1980. A guard discovered DeSimone and Sepe in the laundry room, locked in a silent struggle. DeSimone had Sepe pinned against dryers, hands around his throat. "You told Manry about the jewels," DeSimone hissed. Sepe gasped. "Never." They were separated, but the damage was done. That evening, Burke found Sepe in the infirmary, neck bruised, eyes bloodshot. "DeSimone believes Manry's lies," Sepe whispered. "He thinks I cut a deal." Burke said nothing. Trust, once shattered, couldn't be glued back together. Outside prison walls, the betrayal deepened. Manry's Florida life unraveled. His new wife discovered his past when a Miami Herald reporter knocked on their door. She left him with their infant son, taking only a suitcase. Alone in a motel room, Manry called the FBI. "I want to talk again." Agents arrived to find him shredding Burke's old maps. "They'll kill me," he confessed. "I hear footsteps outside my door at night." The FBI moved him to a safe house, but Manry's paranoia was contagious. He accused his handler of leaking his location, then barricaded himself in a bathroom, screaming about ghosts in the walls. In 1981, Manry vanished. For 3 weeks, the FBI searched Miami's canals and swamps. Then, a fisherman found Manry's wallet floating near Government Cut. Inside, a note: "They found me." The case went cold, but prison rumors flew. DeSimone claimed Manry was sleeping with the Barracudas. Sepe insisted he'd fled to Cuba. Burke just shook his head. "Men don't vanish. They become ghosts." Years later, a Miami bartender admitted Manry had worked there under a fake name until 1984. When a bar fight left him with a head wound, he disappeared again, leaving only a bloodstain on the floor. The crew's families felt the fallout. Burke's daughter stopped visiting after a reporter ambushed her at school. "Does your dad feel guilty?" She changed her name and moved to Oregon. Sepe's ex-wife received threatening letters. "Your husband talks in his sleep." DeSimone's son found his locker stuffed with Lufthansa newspaper clippings and a single coffee stirrer. The crew's crime had become a contagion, spreading through generations like a curse. By 1983, the fractures were irreparable. Burke refused to speak to Sepe after guards intercepted a letter where Sepe suggested Manry's disappearance was long overdue. DeSimone started fights with anyone from Queens, shouting, "You know what they did?" during yard walks. The warden transferred them to separate blocks, but the damage was done. In solitary confinement, Sepe carved a single word into his cell wall: trust. It became his epitaph. The FBI watched it all. Pistone's team filed reports on the crew's disintegration. Subject Burke exhibits emotional detachment. Subject DeSimone displays violent tendencies. Subject Sepe shows signs of psychosis. They'd weaponized the crew's greatest strength, loyalty, turning it into a slow poison. Manry's immunity wasn't just a deal. It was a detonator. And the crew had lit the fuse themselves the moment Manry's coffee cup hit the vault room floor. In 1985, Sepe tried to hang himself with his bedsheets. Guards cut him down, but the attempt left him with a permanent tremor in his hands. During recovery, he received a package: Manry's old wallet, empty except for a photo of the crew taken before the heist. On the back, a message in unfamiliar handwriting: "Ghosts don't forgive." Sepe burned it in the infirmary trash can, the flames reflecting in his hollow eyes. Burke's release day, 1995. Alcatraz had closed months earlier, but he served his full sentence at Leavenworth. Stepping through the prison gates, he carried only a paper bag with his belongings. No family waited. His daughter had married and moved west. His wife's grave sat in Calvary Cemetery. He took a bus to Queens, where his old apartment building now housed Dominican immigrants. The landlord, recognizing him, offered a room for $40 a week. Cash only, no questions. Burke nodded. No questions. His first act was mundane, buying a newspaper at Santarpio's Pizza. The headline read, "Lufthansa robbery mastermind walks free." Patrons fell silent as he sat at the counter. The espresso tasted bitter like regret. He left a $5 tip, the smallest bill he owned, and walked out. That night, he scrubbed floors at a fish packing plant for $1.25 an hour. Freedom isn't free. The phrase haunted him as he counted his earnings. $37.50 for a week's work. Less than 1% of his share from the heist. Sepe didn't last a year outside. Paroled in 1992, he moved into a flophouse near South Station. His hands still shook from the suicide attempt, making safecracking impossible. He took odd jobs, delivering groceries, cleaning offices, but employers fired him when they Googled his name. "You're a risk," one told him, sliding a Lufthansa newspaper clipping across the desk. By 1994, he was living in a cardboard box under the Charlestown Bridge, surviving on soup kitchen meals. One freezing December night, a patrolman found him unconscious in the snow. He died in Massachusetts General Hospital with $2.37 in his pocket and no identification. The morgue tagged him as John Doe number 47. Only when a nurse recognized his prison tattoo did they connect him to the Lufthansa crew. DeSimone fared slightly better. Paroled in 1990, he drove a cab for 10 years, avoiding JFK Airport where Lufthansa trucks still rolled. But in 2000, a passenger recognized him from a True Detective magazine feature. "Aren't you the guy who robbed Lufthansa?" DeSimone slammed on the brakes, fled into an alley, and didn't stop running until he reached Maine. He worked at a lobster cannery under the name Frank Smith, mending nets with his two-fingered hands. His daughter tracked him down in 2005, but he refused to see her. "Tell her I died in prison," he told the social worker. She left a photo of her children on his doorstep. He burned it in his wood stove. The crew's families carried invisible wounds. Burke's granddaughter, born after his release, learned about the heist from a schoolmate. "Your grandpa stole Christmas money." She avoided family reunions, ashamed of the whispers. Sepe's niece inherited his chessboard from the prison library. When she asked her mother about him, she was told, "He chose money over family." DeSimone's grandson, a Boston police officer, requested reassignment after arresting a suspect who sneered, "Your grandpa was a thief too." Even Lufthansa employees suffered long shadows. The night manager, Paul Vario Jr., lost his job and couldn't find new work. He sold newspapers on a street corner until arthritis crippled his hands. In 1998, he died penniless in a VA hospital, clutching a New York Times clipping about Burke's release. The guard subdued by DeSimone's team became an alcoholic. His widow told investigators. He kept reliving that night in his sleep. By 2000, the crew's legacy was dust. The Lufthansa terminal became a parking lot where teenagers smoked pot and traded rumors. "They say ghosts count money there at midnight," one told a reporter. The FBI closed its case file, stamping it resolved. But in Queens tenements, mothers still warn children, "Don't be like the Lufthansa men. Greed steals more than money." The lesson wasn't taught. It was felt in empty apartments and unvisited graves. Burke lived to 72, dying quietly in his Queens room. His obituary in the New York Times mentioned only his brief stint as a bar manager. But on his deathbed, he whispered to a hospice nurse, "Tell them." The vault was cold. She didn't understand. Neither did the priest who closed his eyes. Only the wind through JFK's parking lot seemed to know what he meant. The weight of baby powder on a forgotten coffee cup. The echo of 6 footsteps fading into snow. 2023. JFK Airport parking lot, Queens. Rain slicks the asphalt where Lufthansa's cargo terminal once stood. A tour guide points at a faded plaque, site of 1978 Lufthansa Heist. Teenagers yawn, scrolling TikTok videos of the heist. 6 guys stole $6 million in 6 minutes. The guy drones. "They got caught, 'cause one dropped his coffee cup." A girl snorts. "So dumb. She doesn't know Manry's coffee cup sits in the FBI archives. Its ceramic cracked like old skin. Or that Burke's chessboard sold for $12,000 at auction to a crypto billionaire who called it the original hack. The Lufthansa heist lives in DNA. Airport vaults now use biometric locks that change combinations hourly. Security cameras track footprints in real-time baby powder alternatives. Yet every year, new crews attempt variations. In 2019, thieves tunneled into a London bank vault using Burke's service door tactic, caught only because they left a Starbucks cup with fingerprints. History rhymes, a security expert told The Guardian. But fools never learn the tune. Cultural echoes pulse through time. Martin Scorsese's Goodfellas features the heist as its climax. A Broadway musical, Six Shadows, ran for 3 months in 2018. True crime podcasts dissect the crew's psychology. Burke's discipline was his downfall, argued one host. He planned for everything except human fear. But the most haunting tribute came in 2020, when a street artist painted 6 ghostly figures on JFK's parking garage wall, each holding a duffel bag, faces obscured by snow. Locals left coins at its base. For the ghosts who never got their cut. For the families, the legacy is a quiet scar. Burke's great-granddaughter, a Harvard law student, discovered his past during a background check for a clerkship. "I almost quit school," she told the Crimson. "How do you defend justice when your blood built a prison?" She kept the secret until writing her thesis, The Lufthansa Heist and the Myth of the Perfect Crime. Seppe's niece donated his prison chessboard to a museum with a stipulation. Display it as a warning, not a trophy. The FBI still guards the ghosts. Manry's coffee cup remains in Evidence Locker 7B, its contents cataloged. Ceramic shards, for $1.27 in change. A photo of a woman who vanished from records. When a journalist requested it in 2015, the agent handling the file muttered, "Some cases never close." He slid the cup across the table, its fragments cold as the December night it was dropped. Inside, the photo's woman stared out, her name unknown, her story lost to the vault room's shadows. On December 11, 2028, the 50th anniversary, a historian will stand where Lufthansa's terminal once stood. She'll recount how 6 men walked into a vault and walked out with a fortune, only to lose everything to a single coffee cup. Tourists will nod, snap selfies, and forget. But in Queen's apartments, descendants will pause, feeling the weight of choices made in snow-dusted alleys. They'll hear their grandfather's voices in the silence. Every lock has a key, and they'll wonder what keys they carry in their own pockets, waiting to be dropped. The Lufthansa heist wasn't about money. It was about the moment trust curdles into betrayal, the instant a coffee cup slips from a hand, a snowflake melts, or a man realizes his perfect plan has a flaw only time can reveal. That flaw lives on in every vault, every security camera, every child warned not to trust the quiet man counting steps in the dark. The crew's real legacy isn't in ledgers or prison records. It's in the baby powder still sprinkled on floors worldwide. A silent prayer that no footprint will be left behind.